Somalia's new president is inaugurated amid high hopes of tackling some of the nation's major challenges. As U.S. President Donald Trump prepares to sign a revised travel ban, the Department of Homeland Security issues guidelines likely to increase deportations and tighten immigration regulations. And a U.S. Africa policy expert talks about the major development challenges facing the continent. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Somalia's new president, Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo, is officially taking office today. He was sworn in on February the 8th, the same day he was elected, but a formal inauguration ceremony was conducted on Wednesday. President Farmajo succeeds outgoing President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, who was praised for his statesmanship over the peaceful handover of power. The new president is a dual U.S. Somali citizen and the nation's former prime minister. Heads of state from neighboring countries and representatives of international organizations, including the United Nations and the African Union, were among the dignitaries who gathered for the event. Now, for more on the challenges ahead for the new Somali president, I'm joined by VOA reporter Mohammed Olad. Mohammed, welcome to the program once again. Now, first, we noticed that so many people attended this inauguration, up to 120 dignitaries. Why was there such a response, such a positive support?
Well, it was a symbolic day for Somalis, and the president himself said, and every representative from the international community who was there said it was a very great day. And the reason was, it came a time Somalia leaders transfer power in a peaceful manner and a democratic way. And so to respond to that democracy and transparency was the major point. Another issue was, since a new guy is in place, every representative from the United Nations, the US, the African Union, and everybody wanted to be represented there so that tomorrow they will handle with the new president.
Exactly. But the new president starts his job with a whole, a plate full of challenges ahead of him. What are some of those that we can expect him to start tackling right now?
Well, the president, when he was elected, the expectation was high, but people took to the streets of major Somali cities expecting him to strike it peaceful in Somalia one day. But he himself noted, and in his inaugural speech, he said, it's not easy. These problems have been building up for more than 20 years, and it would take to fix them another 20 years. But he said he will focus on certain issues like security, economy, the current growth in the country, and rebuilding of the national army. And he asked people to help him do these priorities rather than expecting him to fix the whole problem that has been existing for a long time.
And we know that Somalia faces the threat of Al-Shabaab. It faces now famine that is threatening the country itself, and of course the issue of governance throughout the country. Farmajo was prime minister. Is there anything that we can draw from his time as a prime minister that can help us understand how he is likely to approach some of these issues?
Well, the reason why the expectation is very high is that he was only in office few months, and before he left over dispute between the former president and his parliament speaker. But during his time, he bade military, he bade the armed force, the security forces, and he made some promises about fighting against corruption. Before he finished that job, he left. So now he's back. People think he will do the same things he promised last time. And the challenges are still there. Security is still there. Al-Shabaab continue to attack and threaten the security of the country. Days ago, it killed more than 30 people in Mogadishu. And last inauguration, election, when the election venue where the inauguration happened, they held motorists and grenadiers the day before the election. So it's not still easy. But he says, I'm taking this very hard bath, so you are the ones who want to help me so that we can achieve together a beautiful nation in the future.
Farmajo spent quite a lot of his time here in the United States as a dual citizen. What is it that gives people confidence back in Somalia that he is the kind of best person for the task ahead right now?
There are certain things people have been complaining about, and people fed up with corruption, of course, in Somalia, and which is a dependent nation, and poor nation. So the major thing people want him to is to fight against nepotism and corruption. Both of them, he said, he will do it. And other thing is, he's educated. His last government, when he was a prime minister, he chose technocrats from United States, from the Western nations, who were very talented people. So people expect him to nominate a new prime minister who will do the same thing he did while he was a prime minister, and then they will join hands together and fix the problem.
We wish him well, and we'll be watching. We'll see what happens. Thank you very much, Mohammed. And now that's VOA reporter Mohammed Olad joining us live today. Well, now, the South African High Court on Wednesday has blocked the government's attempt to withdraw from the International Criminal Court. It's the latest blow to scandal-plagued President Jacob Zuma from an assertive post-apartheid judicial system. The ICC is the first legal body with permanent international jurisdiction to prosecute genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. Pretoria announced its intention to leave in 2015 after the court criticized it for surrogating an order to arrest Sudanese President Omar Hassan al-Bashir, whom the ICC accused of genocide and war crimes. If the process was to be allowed, it would make South Africa the first country to quit the court in October of this year. However, High Court Judge Phineas Majopelo told the government to tear up its withdrawal notice, saying it was unconstitutional and invalid because it had not passed through Parliament.
The Cabinet decision to deliver the notice of withdrawal to the United Nations Secretary General without prior parliamentary approval is unconstitutional and invalid. 3. The first, second, and third respondents, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, and the President of the Republic of South Africa are ordered to forthwith revoke the notice of withdrawal referred to in paragraph 1 above.
Well, Justice Minister Michael Masuta says the government will press ahead with withdrawing from the Hague-based tribunal, noting that the ruling was based largely on procedure, that the decision to pull out did not pass first through Parliament. Now to West Africa, where Nigeria has given Vice President Yemi Osibanjo extra powers to allay concerns of a paralysis while President Muhammadu Buhari is on sick leave. Nigeria was gripped by instability in 2010 when then-President Umaru Yar'Adua spent 3 months in a Saudi hospital while his aides shrouded his illness in secrecy. His deputy, Goodluck Jonathan, only took over after he died in the midst of a constitutional crisis. Osibanjo is holding cabinet meetings and traveling to the Niger Delta in an attempt to end militant attacks on oil facilities. The arrangement with Osibanjo ensures the day-to-day running of the government. Osibanjo is a Christian lawyer from Lagos, but the long-term risk is that the Muslim North, where Buhari hails from, might not accept Osibanjo as a permanent solution if the president were to become incapacitated. While Jewish communities in Europe say they feel especially vulnerable following the terror attacks across the continent in recent years, community leaders meeting at the Munich Security Conference also warned that the rise of populist far-right parties threatens their way of life. And original reports from Munich.
With the Munich Security Summit wrapping up Sunday, US Vice President Mike Pence and his family travelled the few kilometres out of the city to the site of the former Nazi concentration camp at Dachau. Nearly 32,000 deaths were recorded here, the vast majority Jews. US troops liberated the camp on April 29, 1945. In total, 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. 72 years later, Jewish communities across the continent say anti-Semitism is on the rise again. A session was convened Sunday on the sidelines of the Munich summit to debate how Europe's Jewish communities can be protected. It was attended by former Israeli Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni. Chief Rabbi Pinchas Goldschmidt, president of the Conference of European Rabbis, told VOA security is the #1 concern for Jews across the continent.
terrorism, which we have seen in Toulouse, in Paris, in Copenhagen, in Brussels, which has impacted the Jewish community, has also created an exodus from some countries.
4% of the Jewish population in Belgium and France had left for Israel between 2010 and 2015, according to a recent study by the London-based Institute of Jewish Policy Research. Both countries have seen Jewish communities targeted. In 2014, an Islamic State-inspired attack on the Jewish Museum in Brussels killed 4 people. In 2015, gunmen attacked a kosher supermarket in Paris, the same day as the assault on the offices of magazine Charlie Hebdo. Terrorism expert Peter Neumann told the conference specific protection is needed.
Jewish communities are always in the front line, if you want, and that's why it's important that governments intensify their efforts to protect them. It's also important for Europe in a grander sense, because when Jews get attacked in Europe, it is not only Jews as individuals or as a community. In a sense, it is actually the very fabric of our society.
It's not only terrorism that's driving fear. The rise of the populist far right, especially National Front leader Marine Le Pen in France, has raised concerns that religious practices like circumcision or kosher food could be outlawed.
France is going to be a different country. Europe is going to be a different continent if Marine Le Pen becomes the president of France. There is a correlation, a strengthening of the extreme right in Europe as a byproduct of the changing administration in the United States, which is of concern.
Jewish representatives at the Munich conference called for European governments to dedicate extra policing and intelligence efforts to keep their communities safe. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, Munich, Germany.
Well, a fundraising campaign organized by Muslim Americans has raised tens of thousands of dollars to help repair vandalism at a Jewish cemetery in the central U.S. state of Missouri. Vandals damaged or tipped over as many as 200 headstones at the Chased Shells Emeth Cemetery in University City, just outside St. Louis. The Anti-Defamation League reported at least 10 Jewish community centers in multiple states had received bombing threats Monday, the 4th string of such threats since the beginning of the year. U.S. President Donald Trump on Tuesday condemned the surge in anti-Semitic threats during a visit to the new National Museum of African American History and Culture here in Washington.
This tour was a meaningful reminder of why we have to fight bigotry, intolerance, and hatred in all of its very ugly forms. The anti-Semitic threats targeting our Jewish community and community centers are horrible and are painful, and a very sad reminder of the work that still must be done to root out hate and prejudice and evil.
Well, donations for the repair effort for the Jewish cemetery surpassed the $20,000 goal in just a few hours. And by early Wednesday, the total stood at more than $55,000. At a Washington news conference last Wednesday with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Trump was asked about the increase in anti-Semitic incidents throughout the United States. Rather than condemn the acts, Trump instead talked about his electoral college victory and described the question as unfair, prompting more criticism that he had been silent about the apparent rise in anti-Semitism. Well, as President Trump prepares to soon sign a revised travel ban, the Department of Homeland Security has issued new guidelines that would increase deportations and tighten enforcement of immigration regulations. VOA's Jasmine Oni reports.
Never gets boring.
The Trump administration is moving full steam ahead on its crackdown on illegal immigration. Newly released memos from the Department of Homeland Security outline a more aggressive approach to immigration enforcement.
The memo regarding the executive order Border Security and Immigration Enforcement Improvements outlines the steps that DHS will take to secure the nation's southern border, prevent further illegal immigration, and to repatriate illegal immigrants swiftly, consistently, and humanely.
The new guidelines detail plans to speed up deportations, expand the number of people prioritized for removal, and enlist the help of local law enforcement agents. They also call for the hiring of 15,000 more ICE and Border Patrol agents. According to the White House, the goal is not mass deportation.
The message from this White House and from the DHS is that those people who are in this country and pose a threat to our public safety or have committed a crime will be the first to go, and we will be aggressively making sure that that occurs.
The memos do not remove protections for those under the Deferred Action Childhood Arrival programs, also known as DACA. The program provides certain undocumented immigrants a means to work and live in the United States, although it does not provide legal status. The new regulations come as the president prepares to issue a revised version of his temporary travel ban, which was halted by the courts. The executive order, which was originally issued late January, targeted 7 Muslim-majority countries. It sparked mass protests at airports across the United States. The White House says Trump will not rescind the existing order.
We will prevail because the authority is granted to the president to do what he has to protect the country.
Jesus Semeoni, VOA News, Washington.
Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. And also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Now, coming up, a U.S. Africa policy expert talks about the development challenges facing the continent. Stay with us.
News and notes. This is Living Better.
A community center in Tokyo. Adult women are being wrapped head to toe in white cloth. It's called otanomaki, meaning adult wrapping, and some believe it can alleviate stiffness and posture problems. It's like the age-old practice of swaddling babies adapted for adults, especially for women who've just given birth. This woman organizes group sessions for the therapy. She says that when newborns in Japan are swaddled, it helps them to sleep. This woman tried it and says she liked it. It felt warm, and there was this feeling I've never experienced before. It's hard to describe, she says. Despite the fad, healthcare professionals are not convinced the therapy has lasting benefits, and they warn that people with back problems or other medical issues should consult a doctor first before trying it out. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
Well, welcome back. Now, following U.S. President Donald Trump's assertion that moving forward, his administration will be America first, many people across Africa are closely watching and listening to find out what the president has in store for the continent. For some insight on the areas where the U.S. engages with Africa, I spoke with J. Peter Pham, Vice President and Director of the Africa Center at the Atlantic Council. In part one of our conversation, he talks about major development challenges facing Africa.
I think the biggest challenge Africa faces in development is getting the infrastructure. And by this, I mean not just physical infrastructure, there's a great need of that, certainly, but also the legal, social, and political infrastructure necessary for development to take off. There's a huge gap between what Africa needs and which African leaders have recognized in their vision for 2063 and other development documents, and what is currently available. So there's that gap. Call it a funding gap, if you will, but it's not just about money. It's about social, legal, and political architecture.
Now, if we may just zero in a bit on the legal infrastructure, is this more about making sure that the resources of the continent are protected in such a way that foreign investment, for example, is not just exploiting the continent, or is it also just to kind of a way to facilitate this foreign investment so in a way that will benefit both the investor and the continent?
I think you need a legal infrastructure that protects investors. Otherwise, you're not going to get foreign direct investment of the level needed to build out Africa's physical infrastructure and to develop its resources in a way that benefits the entire world, but especially Africa's people. So a legal infrastructure that gives protection to investors, but also one that gives protection to citizens as well, because citizens are also involved in business, both as employees of businesses, but also as entrepreneurs. And we know the great dynamism of the African entrepreneur that is there. But it's also about rule of law, and that's a question of governance, because nothing scares away investors and business and opportunities as much as lack of governance, lack of rule of law, and nothing attracts it as much as that certainty of the rule of law, fair treatment under the law.
When I speak to African leaders and many other players, especially at the national level, each country seems to believe that they have the necessary environment for foreign direct investment. And what does it take for a country to realize that, what you have is not ideal, in as much as you may get the feeling that people are still coming in, people are investing?
People are interested, they're looking, but very quickly, those who are looking look at the details, and very often there's lack. Sometimes it's due to simply lack of capacity. Sometimes it's perhaps more malevolent than that. But there are obstacles still. Part of it is the rule of law. Part of it is legal certainty. Part of it is market size. Quite simply, the colonial borders are drawn in such a way that single African countries are often not sufficient in scale, but Africans can overcome this. We see this in East Africa, with the East Africa community forming a large market block that makes sense for business to invest in. So I think there are African leaders with vision and African countries that are already pioneering some solutions. So we should look for these best practices.
Now, looking at things from the U.S. perspective, the U.S. Agency for International Development has been involved in Africa for quite a while. Right now, what would be your assessment of how well it has done and what could be done to help the continent benefit from that program?
Well, one thing about the American people, and this has been true through time, is the incredible generosity of the American people, especially when they see real need. And this has largely been something, and this is important to emphasize at a moment of political transition in the United States. Support for Africa, for Africa's development, for the challenges Africa faces, has largely been bipartisan. There's been great continuity in policy from the Clinton administration to the George W. Bush administration to the Obama administration, and one I think is guardedly optimistic to the Trump administration. There's been broad support. President George W. Bush, a Republican, quadrupled the level of foreign direct assistance to Africa during his years in office from the levels he inherited from President Clinton. And President Obama, to his credit, despite the fact that U.S. aid and other budgets were cut by roughly 20–25% in other areas of the world, more or less kept the Bush levels of funding for Africa. So there's broad continuity. Hopefully that continues in the new administration. So that bipartisan comity is something we hope to continue. Now, that doesn't mean that all that money was well spent. And I think the new administration should look at what works and what doesn't, what is sustainable, what isn't, and try to get the most value not only for the American taxpayer who's footing the bill, but also for the Africans who this is supposed to help.
Well, tomorrow on Africa 54, we'll bring you part 2 of my conversation with J. Peter Pham, focusing on the quantity, quality, and value of U.S.-Africa trade. Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, a look at blockchain, one of the fastest growing global technologies, and how it is being applied across Africa. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines. In South Africa, the High Court rules the government's decision to withdraw from the International Criminal Court is unconstitutional. In Libya, the bodies of at least 74 migrants wash up on a shore in the western part of the country after their boat's engine was stolen and left adrift. In Zimbabwe, on President Mugabe's 93rd birthday, many citizens expressed their wish to see him retire. In Nigeria, the vice president receives extra powers to brush off concerns of a political power vacuum as President Muhammadu Buhari is on extended sick leave. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Well, blockchain is a technology that can potentially revolutionize how transactions are conducted over the internet. Africa 54 business correspondent Jill Malandrino, reporting from the NASDAQ market site in New York, explains more about blockchain and how it is being deployed across Africa.
Blockchain technology is sweeping the financial markets worldwide and will certainly be the term du jour over the next several years in financial media. But what exactly is blockchain? This technology can potentially revolutionize how transactions over the internet take place altogether. Blockchain uses cryptography to keep exchanges secure, providing a decentralized database or digital ledger of transactions that everyone on the network can see. This network is essentially a chain of computers that must all approve an exchange before it can be verified and recorded. With the revolutionary system, blockchain technologies are starting to make a global impact. The African continent is, of course, also looking to take advantage of a system which could have a lasting impact on Africa's unbanked sector. IT News Africa takes a look at how some African companies are practically applying the technology outside of banking. First, we go to a pilot project in Ghana. Bitland is an organization that looks to provide services that will allow individuals and organizations to survey land and record deeds into the BitShares blockchain. It does this by streamlining and automating the entire land registration process, so it provides a better system of record by combining automation with blockchain technology. Next, we go to Kenya. OTLW is a development group that builds robust, decentralized applications on top of emerging blockchain technologies such as Ethereum and IPFS. They are a group of decentralized application developers building a universal educational system that is distributed through web technologies. Finally, blockchain takes us to South Africa. The Sun Exchange provides a marketplace where people can purchase solar cells and have them power commercial and community solar plants in the sunniest locations on Earth. From the NASDAQ market site in New York, I'm Jill Malandrino, and this is Africa 54 Business News.
Well, thanks a lot, Jill. And that's our show for today. Now, be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching from all of us in Washington. Have a good night.
Welcome to the Voice of America's Newswords.
This week's newsword is about something that has taken place during the information age. Revolutionary.
Apple has been inventing digital products for 40 years. Handheld devices were a huge success, but buttons were still hard to use. So Apple's designers came up with a revolutionary touch technology, first introduced in iPod Touch.
Here, revolutionary means a discovery that causes a complete change in the way something is done.
It comes from the words revolt and revolution, which mean fighting for change. Revolutionary ideas can be about political or social change.